Imagine stepping into um, just this pristine bioluminescent forest where the water flowing through the streams can literally sing your soul back from the dead.
Right. Just a total utopia.
Exactly. A perfect utopia. You're living in total harmony with nature. You're sheltered by trees that grow in these intricate patterns dictated by the stars themselves.
It sounds idyllic.
It does. But now, imagine that to protect this absolute paradise, your society regularly takes its most promising individuals, right? Its bravest defenders, and it sends them out of the forest and straight into, well, an evolutionary meat grinder.
Yeah, a total nightmare biome.
Right, a biome so brutally hostile that it literally uses gravity as a weapon, and whose horrific apex predators are quite literally fueled by the traumatic emotional baggage of dead aliens.
It is. I mean, it's the ultimate contradiction, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
You have this ecosystem built entirely on grace and renewal and memory, and it's deliberately subjecting its own people to a landscape defined by chaotic mutation and crushing pressure.
And just existential terror.
Exactly. It's a planetary system that basically defies every comforting rule of biology or, thermodynamics that we rely on to understand our own world.
Yeah, so if you're listening to this deep dive right now, and you're thinking, wait, emotional baggage creates gravity weapons?
Yeah.
You are absolutely in the right place today,
You really are.
because we are immersing you in the lore of the living planet Yaenddarr. We are going to explore this very specific, incredibly harrowing transition.
The graduation.
Yes, what happens when you leave the cradle of the Elysium Forest? We're breaking down that ultimate graduation, which is this brutal ritual known as the test of strength. It's required to survive the transition into the deadly savage jungle.
And I think it's important to note right off the bat, this isn't a test of how hard you can swing a sword or like how much armor you can carry.
Right, yeah.
What makes Yaenddarr so uniquely terrifying and frankly so beautiful is that survival in its most hostile environments is dictated entirely by the weight and the clarity of your spirit.
Wow.
Yeah, the planet physically responds to your internal state.
That's just wild to me. But let's start at the beginning, just to ground you, the listener, in the starting line of this journey.
Yeah.
So the Elysium Forest.
The sanctuary.
Right. And based on the source material we have, describing this place as just a forest feels like a massive understatement. I mean, it sounds more like a planetary ICU crossed with a cosmic womb.
Cosmic womb is honestly the perfect way to conceptualize it.
It really fits.
It does, because to grasp what the Elysium Forest is, you really have to look at its genesis. This wasn't a biome that just, slowly evolved over billions of years through random genetic mutation or tectonic plate shifts.
That was ignited.
Exactly. It was born from a primordial seed, which the lore clearly states was a direct, very intentional gift from a being known as Celestria.
The lunar eon.
Right.
And an eon in the context of this specific universe is essentially this massive godlike embodiment of cosmic forces. So Celestria represents lunar energy, pure light, and love.
Yeah.
So she essentially just plants this seed on a really young, violent, cooling planet.
Precisely. Yaenddarr was just stabilizing. It was likely just a volatile rock of magma and early atmospheric storms.
Mess, basically.
A total mess. And the primordial seed germinates in all that chaos. And it unleashes what the texts describe as a verdant tide.
A verdant tide. I love that phrasing.
It's so evocative. It wasn't just a sudden growth of trees. It was an explosive wave of life force that terraformed the entire region instantly.
Wow.
It wove this self-sustaining ecosystem that is deeply, intrinsically connected to celestial energy. So the flora isn't just green, it's bioluminescent. It pulses.
And the architecture of the forest canopy literally mirrors astronomical star charts.
Yes, it's quite literally breathing with the cosmos.
That is just incredible. And it's not empty either. It generated its own caretakers, the Sylvans.
Right, the guardians.
Yeah, beings made of wood and earth who just sort of stepped out of the roots as the forest matured to act as these protectors. But the main residents we really need to focus on today are the Florians.
Well, absolutely. The Florians are the heart of this entire society.
Yeah.
They are a plant-like humanoid species. So if you could imagine beings with bark-textured skin and foliage integrated into their physiology.
Like leaves or petals acting as hair.
Exactly. But the most crucial aspect of the Florians isn't really their biology, it's their philosophy. Their entire societal structure is built on just absolute harmony with their environment.
Right, like they don't do what humans do. They don't just find a forest, chop down the trees, process the lumber, and build a house.
No, not at all.
The sources explicitly point out that they build with the forest. They use this technique called sap etching.
And vine braiding.
Yeah, vine braiding. They literally coax a living tree to hollow out a space for them to sleep in without ever actually harming the tree.
It's amazing.
It really is. It's this unbroken chain of consent between the humanoid and the habitat.
And that unbroken chain, that harmony, is sustained by the true crown jewel of the Elysium forest.
Oh, the elixir.
The absolute core of this utopia, the Elysium waters.
This is where the magic system of Yaenddarr really flexes its muscles, honestly, because the elixir wasn't just like a river that formed from rain.
No, not at all.
The lore says the planet itself, Yaenddarr, actually cracked its own spine.
Yeah, a massive tectonic event.
Right, a massive intentional tectonic quake that split the Earth to reveal these glowing crevices. And out of those crevices flowed this iridescent liquid. It's a compound of Fey essence and lunar water.
And we should probably break down the mechanics of that because Fey essence can sound like a really generic fantasy term.
Yeah, it gets thrown around a lot.
It does, but here it has a very specific function. In this lore, Fey essence represents a chaotic, primordial, raw creative energy. It's totally unbound potential.
But raw potential is volatile.
Highly volatile.
Yeah.
So when you mix that volatile Fey energy with the lunar water, which, remember, carries the stabilizing, loving, memory-preserving light of Celestria, you get elixir.
Wow.
You get a liquid that is essentially liquid memory and restoration.
So it doesn't just, like, knit your flesh back together if you get a cut.
No.
The elixir actually sings with sensory vibrations. Like, the most mind-blowing detail in the source material revolves around the merfolk who live in the Seralis region of the forest.
The Lumarich Basin.
Right. They use these massive basins of elixir for actual soul restoration.
It's really beautiful. When someone dies, the merfolk gather around this elixir pool, but they don't, like, cast a spell.
They don't have wands.
Right. They don't force the soul back into the body with some harsh necromantic command. They sing.
They sing.
Yeah.
And because the elixir is infused with emotional memory, like it literally remembers the vibration of the person's laugh, or it remembers the exact way their name sounds when it's whispered by the wind through the trees, it acts as this acoustic net.
An acoustic net, yes.
It catches the fragments of a shattered soul and just gently stitches them back together.
The tenderness of this mechanic is just staggering when you think about it.
Yeah.
The merfolk are essentially reminding the soul that it is welcome to return. And the elixir acts as a filter during this. It strips away the agony of the death, it filters out the trauma of that final moment, and it restores the core being. It is an ecosystem entirely engineered for grace.
So, okay, put yourself in the shoes of a Florian for a second. You live in a bioluminescent paradise. The trees physically embrace you. The air is literally perfect. And if you happen to suffer a fatal accident, the local water supply and a choir of merfolk will just sing you back into existence completely trauma-free.
Right.
Why would you ever leave? I mean, if this is your reality, the mere concept of needing a graduation from this place or a test of strength, it feels completely contradictory.
Well, and if the Elysium forest were the entire planet, you'd be absolutely right. There would be no need.
Right.
But Yaenddarr is a living organism, and a living organism is rarely uniform. It has distinct organs. It has distinct functions.
Right.
So the Elysium forest is the planet's heart, or perhaps its sanctuary, but it is not a hermetically sealed bubble just floating in space. It is a biome situated on a massive shifting globe that is constantly generating new, highly hostile landmasses.
So it has borders,
It does.
and those borders are under constant siege.
Precisely. The sanctuary is surrounded by very aggressive forces. We see mentions in the lore of the Pharaohs, these savage, shape-shifting predators driven purely by instinct that just frequently test the forest's perimeter.
Constantly probing the defenses.
Yeah. And then there are the shadows, which are a much more profound existential threat that we definitely need to dissect in a moment. But the core planetary logic is this. To protect a sanctuary of pure light, pure peace, and ultimate grace, that sanctuary must forge defenders capable of holding the line.
And you can't forge a hardened defender in a cosmic womb.
Yeah.
You can't, like, learn how to hold back the tide of darkness if you've only ever swam in a glowing pool that sings you lullabies.
Exactly. You have to expose your Guardians to the exact opposite of the Elysium forest. They need to understand what they're protecting, obviously, but they desperately need to understand what they are protecting it from.
The planet demands balance.
Always. The only way to forge a Guardian strong enough to protect life is to plunge them into an environment defined entirely by death, crushing pressure, and chaotic mutation.
Which brings us perfectly to the biome sitting right outside the protective canopy of the Elysian forest.
The savage jungle.
Yeah, an environment so aggressively hostile it sounds like some kind of sadistic evolutionary joke.
It really does. It is the planet's pressure valve. It's the crucible.
So let's talk about the physical reality of just standing at the edge of this jungle, because the environmental hazards alone are just staggering. The ambient air temperature isn't just hot, it's like prehistoric heat.
Right. Unbreathable almost.
Yeah, the lore notes that if you cross the border unprepared, without calibrating your body's thermal regulation, the air can literally ignite your flesh.
And it isn't a dry heat either. The air is unimaginably thick. Oh, gross.
Yeah, it's saturated with a suffocating humidity and these toxic spores that just aggressively seek out biological hosts. Plus, this phenomenon called solar star mist.
Solar star mist.
Right, which sounds pretty, but it's terrifying. It's a dense golden haze that permeates the canopy. And it doesn't just obscure your vision, it is a catalyst for hyperevolution.
Wow.
Breathing it actually accelerates cellular mutation. So if your lungs haven't adapted to process it, you will essentially suffocate on your own accelerated growth.
That is horrifying. It's an atmosphere that literally forces your biology into overdrive just to take a single breath.
Yeah.
And then you have the weather systems on top of that. Horizontal lightning storms that tear through the underbrush, fog banks that are practically solid, shockwave winds that can just snap a massive tree in half.
It's relentless.
But the detail that truly terrifies me, the gravitational pressure, the jungle actually uses gravity as a weapon. This is where we really see the planet actively managing threats. The gravitational pressure in the savage jungle isn't consistent at all. There are these localized gravity wells that can spring up instantly.
Just out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere. If you are caught in one unprepared, you don't just trip, you are violently driven into the soil, crushed by the sheer amplified weight of your own body and the atmosphere above you.
And naturally, an environment this extreme is going to breed wildlife that matches it. The apex predators here are just absolute nightmares.
Oh, they are.
You've got draconians, these massive, heavily armored dragon humanoids capable of withstanding the heat and the gravity. You have elemental thunder apes whose nervous systems are literally charged with the horizontal lightning of those storms we mentioned.
Terrifying.
And saber-toothed dire cats that can hunt in the absolute thickest parts of the solar star mist.
You also have the arachnophage.
Oh, the spiders.
Yeah, these elegant, terrifying spider humanoids that weave webs capable of withstanding those massive shockwave winds. Every single species in the savage jungle is locked in this perpetual arms race of hyperevolution. They just have to be in order to survive another day.
But why? I mean, this is the massive revelation in the lore for me. Why is the savage jungle so brutal? Why is the gravity crushing? And why are the mutations so rampant? It all ties back to the Elysium forest and those beautiful singing Elixir waters.
It does. And this is arguably the most profound, brilliant mechanical connection in the entire Yaenddarr lore. The planet's ecosystem is entirely connected through what is known as the Ixor mechanic.
Let's really break this down meticulously because the implications here are huge. The lore tells us that a vast majority of the sentient residents on Yaenddarr are not actually native to the planet.
Right, they are off-worlders.
Essentially alien migrants who have come to this living world over centuries. Now, Yaenddarr has a very specific, carefully managed rule set for death and rebirth.
It relies on two primary cycles of rebirth to maintain its sort of ecological soul economy.
Soul economy, yeah.
There is the Darkwood cycle, which is for cremated bodies. So the ashes are returned to the soil, leading to a much slower, more earthbound reincarnation. And then there is the Elixir water cycle, which is that immediate memory-retaining rebirth we discussed with the merfolk.
Right. And for the natives of Yaenddarr, this system works flawlessly. When a native Florian or Sylvan dies and their body goes into the Elixir waters, the Elixir gently strips away the immediate trauma of their death. The fear, the pain, the emotional residue, it's all washed away so the soul can return whole.
Exactly.
And because they are natives to the planet, their emotional runoff is completely compatible with the ecosystem. The Earth just absorbs it naturally.
But the off-worlders are a completely different story. They didn't evolve in harmony with Yaenddarr. They bring alien psychologies, foreign existential dreads, traumas from dying on other planets, just the heavy, complex baggage of the wider universe.
Brilliant trauma.
Exactly. When an off-worlder dies on Yaenddarr, and their body is mistakenly or intentionally placed into the sacred Elixir waters, the Elixir still performs its function. It obediently strips away the trauma to cleanse the soul.
Because that's what it does.
That's its job. But the planet's natural systems cannot metabolize alien trauma. It's ecologically incompatible. So that unresolved foreign emotional sludge condenses, and it physicalizes into a highly toxic, hyper-corrupted substance called Ixor.
It literally turns their emotional baggage into a tangible toxic sludge.
It is.
That is amazing.
Right.
And this Ixor doesn't just evaporate. It's in the Elixir waterway system. It's the rivers.
Huh.
And where do all the rivers from the high-altitude Elysium forest eventually flow?
Downstream, straight into the basin of the savage jungle.
So the savage jungle is essentially acting as a planetary liver.
Yes.
It's an ecological immune system, but it is running almost entirely on the unprocessed emotional baggage and unresolved fear of dead aliens.
That is exactly what it is. And I think this changes how we view the jungle entirely. The planet isn't designing some sadistic obstacle course just for fun. It is frantically trying to survive an infection. The savage jungle was originally calibrated to absorb the manageable native trauma of Yaenddarr, but the constant heavy influx of off-worlder Ixor overloads the biome's processing capacity.
It cranks the difficulty setting of the entire ecosystem to maximum.
It does. When you have high concentrations of Ixor completely saturating the soil, it actually warps the physical laws of the area. That is what creates the crushing gravitational pressure wells we were talking about.
Wait, really? The gravity is the trauma.
Yes, it's the physical weight of unresolved grief and terror literally pulling you down.
Oh my God.
And the Ixor is what forces the flora and fauna to mutate so violently.
And it gets worse, right? Because when this liquid Ixor flows together and pools in these deep ravines, it forms what the lore calls Ixor wells. And these wells act as spawning pools for the shadows.
The shadows are the physical embodiment of the trauma. They are shadowy, humanoid entities driven by just an insatiable hunger to consume life.
Nightmare fuel.
Pure nightmare fuel. And the shadows that are born specifically from the off-worlder Ixor are immensely stronger, they're violently unstable, and they are capable of dominating massive sectors of the jungle.
And they are essentially immortal, right? The lore says if a draconian or a thunder ape manages to actually kill a shadow, it doesn't just die and go away. It dissolves back into a dark mist, sinks into the Ixor-saturated soil, and eventually resurrects, usually stronger and more adapted to whatever just killed it.
Which forces the biological apex predators, the apes, the dire cats, to constantly evolve just to survive the sheer presence of these immortal trauma monsters.
Right.
The entire biome is locked in a hyper-evolutionary death spiral, all caused by the emotional baggage of outsiders.
This presents such a fascinating philosophical dynamic for the planet. Like, Yaenddarr is a world that makes the psychological completely physical.
Yeah.
The savage jungle is basically the planet's shadow self.
Absolutely.
It is purposefully carrying all the dark, heavy, unresolved, toxic weight of the universe just so that the Elysium forest can remain light, peaceful, and pure.
The Elysium forest can only afford to be a utopia because the savage jungle is willing to swallow all that corruption. It's a symbiotic relationship of profound tragedy. The utopia requires the nightmare to process its waste.
Wow.
And once you understand this dynamic, you understand exactly why the Florians use the savage jungle as the proving ground for their defenders.
Because you can't just send a generic soldier to fight a monster made of literal, condensed psychological trauma.
No, absolutely not. If you are going to protect the sanctuary from the living embodiment of existential dread, you cannot send untested warriors. You must send individuals who have proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that they will not shatter under the psychological and physical weight of that trauma.
Which brings us to the graduation, the ultimate test to cross the border. It's formally called the Trial of Return in the texts, but the participants know it by its much more accurate, ominous title, the Rite of Flame.
This is where the philosophy of Yaenddarr's combat system really diverges from standard fantasy tropes.
Completely. I mean, in any other lore, if you need to pick 5 champions to go into a death jungle, you run a tournament. You find the warrior who can bench press a boulder, or the mage who can shoot the biggest fireball, or the guy with the thickest enchanted armor.
Right, standard combat stats.
Exactly. But the Elysium Forest doesn't care about your bench press. The sources state the 5 contestants for the Rite of Flame were chosen entirely by resonance.
Resonance is a crucial concept here. It implies a frequency. The force isn't looking for physical output, it's looking for internal alignment. It's evaluating how clearly and powerfully a person's soul vibrates in response to the world around them.
So the Forest selects a graduating class of 5 incredibly distinct individuals, and each of them represents a completely different philosophy of survival. Let's break down this roster as they stand at the border between the glowing utopia and the prehistoric furnace. First, we have Umok.
Umok is such a fascinating figure. He is described as a bridge walker carrying dual essence, and he isn't a fresh-faced recruit either. He's an elder, a veteran.
His body is already heavily scarred, which means he's experienced translation and mutation. He's likely spent a lot of time on the borders where the Elixir meets the Ixor. The lore describes his strength as memory-made movement.
He represents the burden of history and experience. A bridgewalker must hold the tension between the pure life of the Florians and the mutated reality of the outskirts. His combat style is likely deeply reactive, built on decades of just recognizing patterns and surviving by a hair's breadth.
Then, completely contrasting his veteran status, we have Leora of the Ember Branch, a young Florian, specifically a firevine weaver. I love this concept so much. How do you weave fire and vines, which are highly flammable, without destroying your own weapon?
It requires absolute rhythm and control.
Yeah.
The text notes she is small in frame, but lethal with rhythm. She doesn't overpower her enemies. She fights with a harproot shard and a whisper. There's a story in there of her fighting off a dire cat using precisely calculated acoustic defense.
That's so cool.
It is. She represents precise, calculated, almost artistic survival.
Next is Varan of the Low Tide. He's an Undine, a water elemental, specifically a tide sculptor. And his psychological profile is just wild for someone about to enter a jungle full of screaming shadow monsters. He is entirely emotionally cold. He wields pressurized water like it's woven steel. But his motivation? He's not there to protect the forest or win glory. He's entering the savage jungle to study combustion in real time.
Varen represents pure logic, completely detached from empathy or fear. He views the savage jungle not as a crucible of the soul, but as an extreme thermodynamic laboratory.
He's just doing a science experiment.
Basically, he genuinely believes his cold, calculative precision can outmaneuver the chaotic fury of the environment.
And if Varan is cold logic, contestant number 4 is absolute chaotic heat. Kilo Brambleback, a half-fey wild soul.
Kilo is the embodiment of the Fey essence we discussed earlier, raw, unbound, highly volatile energy. He carries a massive crescent blade and is described as having absolutely no concept of restraint.
The ultimate adrenaline junkie. He laughs in battle. He lives completely off the harmonic grid of the forest. He's just looking for the next massive high.
And finally, we have contestant number 5, Finn the Hollow-Eyed, the wild card.
We know almost nothing about him, and neither does the forest. He's quiet. He's marked by these strange roots and completely unrecorded in the Sylvan archives. He just showed up the night before the trial, stepped into the contestant ring, and because the forest's residents didn't actively reject him, he was allowed to compete.
So we have 5 distinct approaches to survival: experience, rhythm, logic, mania, and silence. But before they can even take a single step into the jungle, they have to face the preparation ritual, the flame seed.
This is where I realized this wasn't just an obstacle course. This ritual is insane.
Yeah.
They don't test their weapons. They just stand in the Ashwood Circle, surrounded by ancient Fey magisters, and one by one they must reach out, touch the glowing flame seed, and speak a single absolute truth about themselves.
Right.
Not a boast to intimidate their enemies, not a wish or a prayer, a raw psychological revelation.
It acts as an absolute calibration of the soul. The flame seed doesn't care about your physical power. It cares entirely about your self-awareness. Let's examine the truths they offered, because they are deeply revealing.
Yeah, let's look at them. So Umok steps up, touches the seed, and says, "I have killed without hating and lived without name."
It's a profound admission of the toll his duty has taken on him. He has become a tool of survival, stripping away his own ego and malice just to endure.
Then Leora steps up, the young, talented weaver. She touches the flame and says, "I am not brave. I am burning too slowly."
That level of self-awareness in a young combatant is staggering. She isn't feigning fearlessness at all.
No.
She knows she is terrified, and she knows she lacks the explosive, volatile power of someone like Kilo. She fully unfits her defensive nature.
Then Varan, the cold Undine, touches it and states, "I feel nothing when I win. That's why I must test."
Again, pure logic. But he is admitting a deeply disturbing psychological emptiness. He is chasing these extreme environments, hoping to find some kind of baseline emotional response.
Kilo touches it and grins. "If I don't bleed for fun, I've wasted the week."
A completely honest admission of his addiction to chaos and pain.
And then Finn, the wild card, steps up, touches the seed, and says absolutely nothing. Silence. But the flame flares violently anyway, accepting his silent truth. Now, here is where my mind got stuck when I was reading this.
Why?
Why? Why does a survival marathon require a spiritual lie detector test? I mean, if I'm about to go fight a lightning-infused thunder ape in a prehistoric gravity well, what practical difference does it make if I admit that I'm secretly not brave or that I feel empty inside? How does this actually prepare you for physical combat?
Well, to understand why the flame seed ritual is mandatory, you have to look back at the specific nature of the enemy. In the savage jungle, physical strength alone is entirely meaningless.
Because of the environment.
Right. You cannot outmuscle a localized gravity well that suddenly weighs 100 tons. You cannot outendure air that literally catches fire. But more importantly, the jungle doesn't just attack your physiology, it attacks your psychology.
Because it's saturated with Ixor.
Exactly. The environment is built on corrupted emotion. The shadows are spawned from unresolved trauma, fear, and internal dissonance. If you enter that jungle with a crack in your psychological armor, if you harbor delusions about your own strength, if you are acting out of unacknowledged terror, or if you are projecting false bravado, the jungle will smell it.
The Ixor will literally latch onto your internal lies.
Yes. If Leora had touched the flame seed and said, "I am a fearless warrior," but was secretly terrified, the moment she stepped into the jungle, the Ixor would manifest that terror against her.
Oh, wow.
A shadow would specifically form to prey on her hidden cowardice. The gravity would target her dissonance and crush her harder.
Oh, that makes so much sense. The lie detector is literally the only armor that works.
The trial of flame is a calibration because complete, unflinching, total self-awareness is your only shield out there. You have to know exactly who and what you are, your flaws, your emptiness, your fears.
Because then they can't be used against you.
Exactly. If you have already claimed your flaws as truth, the jungle cannot use them against you as a weapon. If you don't define your own soul at the border, the savage jungle will define it for you the moment you cross, and the result will be fatal.
So speaking your absolute truth gets you through the door. Your soul is calibrated. But actually surviving the interior of the jungle, taking that calibrated soul into the meat grinder, that is a completely different reality. Which brings us to the actual outcome of the Rite of Flame, the brutal reality of ascension.
The text makes it very clear. Calibration does not guarantee survival. The outcome of this trial is devastating.
It is an absolute bloodbath. Think about it. These are the 5 most resonant, prepared champions the forest could find. Out of the 5 who entered the jungle, only 2 managed to even crawl back to the flame gate.
And the state they return in.
It challenges the very definition of a victory. Let's look at what happened to them, because the jungle specifically targeted their psychological profiles. Let's start with the casualties. Finn, the silent wildcard.
Completely unaccounted for, swallowed by the jungle, no trace found.
Just gone.
His silence at the flame seed perhaps indicated he had no true anchor to himself. Without an anchor, the chaotic flow of the savage jungle simply washed him away into nothingness, eliminated entirely.
Then we have Kilo, the half-fey adrenaline junkie who just wanted to bleed for fun. He got exactly what he asked for, but the jungle gave it to him in a way he couldn't just laugh off. The lore says he suffered a phase bite from a light eater.
We need to explain what a phase bite is to really appreciate the horror here.
Please do.
A light eater is a predator mutated heavily by Ixor. It doesn't just bite with physical teeth. It shifts its jaw into a parallel dimensional frequency. It bites the space where you are, bypassing physical armor completely.
Oh, that is terrifying.
Kilo's mania, his desire to just charge in and bleed, meant he threw himself wildly at an enemy that wasn't even bound by standard physics. He couldn't dodge what he couldn't see, so he gets half his face literally shredded out of existence. He doesn't die, but he's brought back unconscious, completely broken, murmuring these strange fey lullabies, and is placed into deep, long-term regeneration. His chaos just wasn't enough to beat the jungle's chaos.
And then we have Varan, the cold, detached Undine who thought he could treat the jungle like a thermodynamic laboratory. He loses his left arm in a clash with a thornhide worm.
A creature whose scales are explicitly designed to absorb and reflect kinetic energy. Varan likely tried to calculate the perfect pressurized water strike. He used his cold logic to determine the exact angle of attack.
But pure logic cannot calculate the irrational, Ixor-fueled rage of a native beast. His precision meant nothing against unpredictable, massive fury. His logic failed to protect him, costing him a limb.
So that leaves our 2 survivors, the ones who actually passed the graduation. But Leora and Umok hardly look like triumphant heroes. Leora, the Firevine Weaver, barely escapes a flame-rooted chasm. She returns with severe, agonizing burns all across her torso.
And how does she survive? Not by fighting. The text notes she relied on emotion-based memory flares to navigate her way home.
Because she knew her truth. She knew she wasn't brave, and she burned slowly. When the prehistoric heat overwhelmed her, she didn't try to outmuscle it. She used her magic to project memories of the cool Elixir waters, shielding her mind and body just enough to drag herself back to the border.
She survived because she relied on her defensive rhythm.
Right.
And then there is Umok, the veteran bridge walker. He survives, but at a terrible psychological cost. To disperse a massive shadow frenzy that cornered him, he had to completely abandon his meticulously maintained control. He had to go feral.
He had to let the chaos in. He capped into this primal monstrous state, letting the Ixo rhythm temporarily overwrite his Florian harmony just to tear the shadows apart. He returns critically injured, heavily traumatized from the translation of letting his mind sink into that feral state.
So you have two survivors, both physically and mentally shattered, and two casualties brought back in pieces. And they are all gathered and placed gently into the Elixir Lake to heal in the quiet, cocooned in water glyphs and spore light.
And as I read this part of the source material, I couldn't help but feel like I was looking at a profoundly broken system. I mean, put yourself in the perspective of an outsider looking at
He
this.
looks crazy.
It isn't a graduation, it's a meat grinder. You are taking your best and brightest, the valedictorians of your utopian society, and throwing them into an active volcano just to see who doesn't completely melt. How is this justifiable? Does the forest actually value these individuals, or are they just disposable fodder required to keep the border safe?
It is very easy to look at the physical toll, the missing limbs, the shredded faces, the severe burns, and see only catastrophic loss. Our human instinct is to equate wholeness with success and damage with failure. But to understand Yaenddarr, we have to deeply reframe how strength is defined. The lore provides a very specific detail here that answers your question. As they float in the Elixir Lake, the text explicitly notes that the forest watches them in reverence.
Reverence for getting ripped apart. That feels almost morbid.
It's not morbid, though. It's deeply spiritual. The text continues. The reverence is not for strength alone, but for what was sacrificed to wield it.
Wow.
That phrasing is the key to the entire culture. In the Elysium Forest, enduring the savage jungle is never about conquering it. You cannot conquer an evolutionary furnace fueled by the grief of 1,000 worlds. If you try to conquer it, you end up like Varan or Kilo, broken by your own hubris.
So enduring it is about allowing yourself to be broken down by the truth of the world.
Exactly. It's about surviving the reshaping. The savage jungle broke them physically and mentally, but in doing so, it proved the absolute resilience of their core soul. And remember the nature of the Elixir waters they are floating in. Elixir holds memory.
Oh, the water is absorbing their experience.
Yes. The water is recording their courage, their unimaginable loss, and their endurance. It is translating their physical trauma into the collective spiritual ascension of the forest.
That is beautiful.
They aren't just fighters anymore. They have been baptized in the reality of the planet's darkest, heaviest self. They are the living bridge between the light and the dark.
It's an incredibly heavy price to pay for enlightenment, honestly. But in the magic system of Yaenddarr, physical loss is rarely just an ending. Because this world is so aggressively magically alive, trauma often paves the way for literal new life. Which brings us to the climax of this entire journey and the most surprising outcome of this brutal test of strength. A twist I absolutely did not see coming.
The birth of the interfacers.
Yes. Let's focus back on Umok. We mentioned he went feral to survive the shadow frenzy, and he suffered critical injuries. During his recovery in the Elixir Lake and his subsequent attempts to train through the trauma, the physical toll culminates in the loss of his arm. It simply cannot be saved.
No.
But this isn't a standard sterile amputation.
Because Florian biology, as we established earlier, is essentially hyper-accelerated sentient botany.
Right, so from his severed limb, as the flesh and bark separate, this thick cloud of bioluminescent spores erupts. The blood and the spores land on the fertile soil of the diagnostics hollow, and almost immediately, a sapling shoots out of the ground.
Propelled by the elixir-rich environment and the immense life force concentrated in a veteran Florian's blood, the growth cycle is compressed into mere hours. The sapling rapidly unfurls, expanding and shaping itself until it forms a young Florian.
A new life, born directly from the severed limb of a champion. It's a botanical miracle. Umok, watching this happen, gives her a name. He names her Illara. She just drops into existence.
But the immediate assumption from the medical staff, and frankly from the reader, is one of terror.
Naturally, think of the ingredients that went into making her. She was born from the blood and spores of a limb that was heavily traumatized in the savage jungle, a jungle saturated in Ixor, a limb that went feral to fight shadows. You would expect this new child to carry that taint.
The Florian medics and the Verdant Diagnostics Hollow assume exactly that. They scan her, fully expecting to find a child of the void, a shadow-born entity carrying the Exor corruption directly into the heart of their utopia. They fully expect her to be a monster.
But the scan completely upends their entire understanding of biology and magic. They find absolutely zero shadow corruption, none. The trauma didn't transfer. Instead, they find that her core essence resonates with something called solar star potential.
Which is an incredibly rare, almost mythical resonance. It is a radiant, pure essence of unadulterated light that hasn't been recorded since the ancient days of the eons. Her mere presence, her aura, causes dormant sun vines in the medical hollow to violently flower instantly.
She wasn't made to balance the darkness. She was born to ignite it.
It is a profound, breathtaking thematic resolution by the planet itself. Umok gave up his arm, he gave up his meticulous control, he surrendered his physical wholeness to the darkest, most traumatic environment on the planet. And from that ultimate painful sacrifice, the planet did not reflect the darkness back at him. It digested the trauma and reflected back pure, concentrated light.
There is a quote from the elder healer, Rael, who watches the scan. He says, "She's not a child of the void, she's a child of the flare." And Umuk, despite all his trauma, recognizes the poetry of it immediately. He looks at Alara and says, "She was born from what I gave up, but she chose what I never could. She is not my legacy, she is my continuation."
It's a beautiful moment of generational shift. But it leads immediately to a massive administrative and strategic problem for the Grand Council of the Elysium Forest. You have Umuk, the scarred champion who survived the Crucible, and you have Alara, the child of solar starlight born from his sacrifice. What is their role in society?
Right, because you just birthed a being of pure light.
Yeah.
You'd think they would put her in the center of the forest on a pedestal to keep everyone safe. But the Grand Council issues a stunning decree. They look at Umok and Alara and they say, "Hey, you know that nightmare jungle that just chewed you up, cost you an arm, and nearly broke your mind? We're sending you both right back."
But the crucial distinction is how they are being sent back. They are not being sent as soldiers. They are not being sent to conquer or kill.
This is the twist that recontextualizes the entire deep dive. The Council assigns them a new title. They are sent back as interfacers.
An entirely new paradigm of defense.
Their mission parameters are completely different from a standard border guard. Their mission isn't to patrol the border and execute shadows or hunt down thunder apes. Their mission is to map the borders, to find the natural invisible bridges and ley lines that the shadows use to migrate, and most importantly, to tune the magical glyph fields on the border to echo understanding rather than just defense.
This is where we hit the true thematic climax of Yaenddarr's lore. The test of strength we've been discussing for the past hour didn't just break the contestants, it evolved the society's understanding of strength itself.
It's like they spent centuries building a sharper and sharper sword. They threw their best warriors into the fire, sacrificing their limbs, their sanity, and their lives just to forge the perfect blade to fight the jungle, only to realize at the very end of the process that a sword is completely useless. They didn't need a sword, they needed a tuning fork.
A tuning fork is an absolutely brilliant analogy for what an interfacer is. Let's look at the mechanics of why a sword fails. Phase 1 of the Elysium Forest's strategy was brute survival. Build defensive walls, train hardened warriors, and fight the symptoms of the jungle.
Right.
But the Grand Council, through Umok's sacrifice and Alara's birth, realizes a terrifying ecological truth. Fighting the savage jungle is essentially fighting the planet itself.
Because the jungle is the planet's immune system. If you take a sword and try to hack away your own liver because it's processing toxins, you are going to kill yourself.
Yeah.
You cannot kill the planet's immune system without killing Yaenddarr.
Exactly. The shadows and the mutations are awful, yes, but they are a necessary biological response to the Exor. If you just endlessly kill shadows, you're just treating a symptom, and the symptom will always resurrect stronger. You cannot outfight a system designed to process universal grief.
So if you can't fight it, you have to communicate with it. You have to harmonize with the frequency of the
We
trauma.
have to interface. By pairing Alara, a being of pure, resonant solar bloom, with Umok, a veteran whose soul intimately understands the rhythm and pain of the shadows, the Council is creating a perfect tuning fork. They are actively attempting to heal the planetary trauma at a systemic level.
Because let's extrapolate on Alara's magic for a second. If the savage jungle is fueled by the Exor runoff, the alien emotional sludge, then swinging a crescent blade at a shadow doesn't fix the Exor in the soil. But Alara's solar star potential, her pure light,
Her light might be the only force on the planet capable of actually neutralizing the Ixor at its source. She isn't fighting the trauma. Her frequency digests it. She synthesizes it. When they tune the glyph fields to echo understanding, they are essentially projecting a frequency of absolute empathy and pure light into the gravity wells of the jungle.
She is literally changing the acoustic environment of the border so that the Elysium forest and the savage jungle can exist in a state of communication rather than a state of constant bleeding warfare.
She is the living bridge between the utopia and the crucible. And this completely fundamentally redefines what the graduation means in this lore. The ultimate test of strength isn't about becoming tough enough, cold enough, or chaotic enough to kill your nightmares. It's about becoming whole enough and self-aware enough to understand them.
It requires a type of strength that is infinitely harder to achieve than simply swinging a weapon. It requires the strength to stand in the dark, listen to the trauma, and offer understanding.
And that is the true magic of Yaenddarr.
So let's take a step back and recap this incredible journey for you listening, because we have covered a massive amount of ecological and magical ground today. We started our journey in the protective, luminous, memory-filled embrace of the Elysium forest, a literal utopia of sap-etched treehouses and elixir waters that can gently sing a shattered soul back from the void. But we learned that to protect that profound peace, the forest demanded a brutal toll from its guardians.
We waded deep into the evolutionary furnace of the savage jungle. We explored how crushing localized gravity, prehistoric heat, and violently mutated apex predators are entirely fueled by the Ixor, the condensed, unresolved emotional trauma and existential fear of dead off-worlders. We saw the planet struggling to contain the toxic baggage of the universe.
We witnessed the rite of flame, a graduation ritual that acted as an unflinching spiritual lie detector, demanding absolute psychological truth as the only viable armor against an ecosystem built on dissonance. And we saw the horrific, visceral cost of that trial, watching resonant champions lose their limbs, their faces, and their sanity into beasts that defied logic and physics.
But from the ashes of that sacrifice, from the blood of a severed limb, we saw the birth of Alara, a botanical miracle of pure solar starlight, proving that true strength isn't just surviving trauma, but taking the darkness the world inflicts upon you and growing something radiant from it.
And it all ended with a massive paradigm shift. The realization that the ultimate victory isn't found in a sharper sword to destroy your enemy, but in becoming a tuning fork to seek harmony with your worst nightmares. The birth of the interfacers.
And as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought to mull over, something that reframes the entire lore we just discussed. We've established definitively that the savage jungle's absolute worst horrors, the immortal shadows, the crushing gravity wells, the agonizing hypermutations of the wildlife are all born from the Ixor.
The emotional baggage of the universe dumped onto Yaenddarr.
Yes, and the jungle, as the planet's immune system, actively works to contain that corruption. It absorbs the toxic sludge, keeping the Ixor from spreading and destroying the pure sanctuary of the Elysium forest. So consider this perspective. Are the terrifying, vicious monsters of the savage jungle, the shadows, the dire cats, the elemental thunder apes, are they actually Yaenddarr's greatest martyrs?
Whoa, that changes everything.
Think about it. They are forced into a state of perpetual, agonizing mutation. They are born into a prehistoric furnace, subjected to crushing gravity and driven to violent madness by the alien trauma saturating their soil. They carry the physical weight of the universe's pain, living in a constant state of hyper-evolutionary torture, specifically so that places like the Elysium forest can remain peaceful, pure, and untouched.
They are the ultimate tragic scapegoats for a peaceful world. They suffer so the Florians can sleep in harmony.
Exactly. So the next time you face a savage jungle in your own life, whether it's a chaotic project, a hostile environment, or a terrifying internal struggle, ask yourself, what unresolved trauma is this chaos trying to contain? What is the nightmare actually protecting you from?
That is a thought that is going to stick with me for a very long time. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the ethereal star system and the breathtaking, brutal, living lore of Yaenddarr. Remember, whether you're safely navigating your own personal Elysium forest or facing down the crushing gravity of a savage jungle, keep seeking those aha moments. We'll see you next time.